Hello, I'm ED-SKaR, and it has been a while since I live streamed. If someone in the chat can give me... there is no one in the chat. Well, eventually someone will arrive. For anyone who's watching the recording, I'll quickly explain what I'm getting up to. I have a whole bunch of bolt-action models for my British army. Ideally, I would like to get them all done, because this is now basically everything on frame, everything in frame right now is the entirety for me to finish up my 8th army completely, which is pretty cool to be that close to being done with the project. Although, for anyone who's been following my bolt action, there's plenty more to come, but I'll be done with the British. Specifically for today, I want to get my Sherman painted. That's the first priority, because I will be using this in a game of Tank War, Bolt Action Tank War, coming up soon. And I'll be using my Toon Sherman Firefly and my 2 Cromwells that have appeared on the channel before, but also because we're running 1250 points, I can fit in 4 tanks quite happily, and so this will be number 4. I will also be running Brain Carrier, Universal Carrier with a bunch of infantry on board. This is most of the way painted. I think the tracks and the road wheels will do most of the way there. I might do a bit of weathering to it as well, but other than that, this is well on the way to being done. Let's ruin my chat. Thank you, Rustigators. There is someone in chat. Music is a bit louder than I think. Well, let's just make the music a whole bunch quieter. That may be too far. Let me know. There's a decent 30 to 60 second delay on chat messages, so when that comes through I can adjust it. Where was I? Yes. So first priority, get the Sherman done. Second priority is to get the Universal Carrier done, and then after that, if we have any spare time, we almost certainly won't, but finish up my infantry, of which there are about 10. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. There are 11 more infantry to go. I actually have, I'm going to swap with someone, the boys anti-tank rifle spare arms that I've got for someone else's spare Piat arms. So I'm going to have one extra model at some point, which will be Piat. But for the moment, let's have a look at what we've actually got, because like I say, it's been a while since I actually built or painted any of these. Now the Universal Carrier I've not been painting on stream, so I've just been kind of dipping in here and there. I do have the weapons for it here. So this Bren at the bottom is going to go in the bow here, and I've just dropped that on the floor, so it's probably gone forever. There it is. Recovered. Thank you, Rustigator. I'll pop it back up just a tiny spot. That's about a quarter of the way back to where it was. That's a much longer delay. That's like a good 2 or 3 minutes. Usually it's about 30 seconds delay, but it seems to be much longer today. Shouldn't affect us too much because we're just having a chat. Always blaming the cat. Always blaming the cat. Right. So the bow machine gun is going to be, or the bow gun is going to be the boys anti-tank rifle. No. The bow gun's going to be the Bren machine gun, but I'm going to include this spare boys anti-tank rifle that I have. I'm just going to like tuck it away back kind of in here, or maybe in the rear compartment, just so that I can say, if I want to at some point run this with the boys in the bow, I can say, well, it's on the model, they just swap it around when they need to. Not ideal, but I tried to come up with a way of swapping it out with magnets or whatever, but it just wasn't going to happen, even with keeping this part removable. Kind of that whole front section, getting in there to switch it around every time you want to, it's just fiddly. I know some people love magnetizing every tiny little thing, but it just gets a bit silly sometimes. But the crew and passengers are painted. The hull is not necessarily completely done, but it's most of the way done. Maybe just it needs a bit of weathering. And then, yeah, tracks and road wheels. Tracks and road wheels and it's fine. And then a bit of weathering and fine detail and it's done. The Sherman has a bit more work to go. We do have tracks and road wheels to do in the same way, so I'll probably paint those together. There's a whole bunch of other details as well. Headlights, tail lights. Yeah, these are the tail lights. Let's pull focus on that. Yeah, so tail light there. We've got all sorts of tools and stuff on the side of the hull. Machine gun on top. I might actually pull that machine gun off and give it to a different vehicle, because I generally don't run the anti-air machine guns on my British tanks. What else? What else? A lot of this is going to stay the camo colour. Oh yes, of course, the camo. There's a lot of work needs doing. Let's get started with that while I'm talking about it. Where's my black paint? It's already out. There we go. So this camouflage scheme is a copy of one on the M3 Grant at the Tank Museum, Bovington. And so if anyone wants to quickly do an image search for M3 Grant, Bovington, you'll find it's a slightly different tank. Same running wheels, same running assembly, but it's a different tank. But I'm doing the same camouflage pattern as that has. Let's drop the tracks off to make it a bit easier for myself. And is characterized by big splotches of tan, big splotches of dark brown, and then in between them a double line which is white on the side of the tan and black on the side of the dark brown. For anyone who's followed along with my cartoon Sherman that I did not so long ago, you'll recognise that is the same camera pattern. And of course, for anyone who remembers all the way back when I did the live stream, the last live stream of this tank, which was, I think, 18 months ago. Certainly over a year ago. I don't want to go hunting for that now because I'll disturb the stream. But yeah, just a quick black line. I already did the white line, so I just need to finish up the black line. There are actually some parts of the tank where I didn't do the white line. I missed them. Mainly that is the back here, but also underneath the tracks. I may have to go back to the airbrush, do that off camera and fill in the dark brown on the tracks, because that's somewhat of a glaring problem. Of course, the other problem related to that for the airbrush is that the dark brown that I was using, one of my favourite colours, Revell's Lederbrun, is pretty much dried out at this point. It's pretty much gone. I do have another dark brown already. But it's quite a bit lighter actually. It's more of a medium brown than this nice rich dark brown. But yeah, that's definitely not going through the Rustigator says the Toon Sherman looks great in that vid. Don't think it would be somewhat in scale for bolt action. I have used it in a bolt action game. The scale is a little bit off. The overall size is about right. It's about the right kind of bulkiness, but it isn't the same size. It's shorter in terms of height. Sorry, I'm getting loads of messages. Or is it just that my phone has decided to finally connect and these are the old messages? Yes. Hopefully that should make it quiet. Toon Sherman scaling, yes. So it's taller in terms of the height. Particularly the tracks are a lot taller, so the whole thing is almost half again the height. In terms of its length front to back, it is a little bit shorter, a fifth or a quarter. But in terms of its width, it's actually about the same. It's a little bit wider, but not by much. Practically, it doesn't actually matter, because if you can see the enemy can see you. And so there's there's no kind of, it's not like 40k where you've got things that can see and not be shot at, or kind of climbing over friendly units to gain line of sight where they wouldn't other be. Bolt action's a much simpler rule set that doesn't really have those loopholes to exploit. Yeah, but technically it's the wrong shape, but it works. Actually, the game of Tank Wars that I mentioned at the top of the stream, that is why I'm painting this tank. I will be also running the Toon Sherman and both of my Cromwells, basically all four of my British tanks. Pretty much just because it's the only army I have enough tanks for. As much as I play the Soviets the most often, I've only got one T-34 and one T-70 light tank. So that's like 300 and something points, and I need 1250 points. Whereas two Cromwells, a Sherman and a Sherman Firefly is 950 points, I think. So I've got my 17-pounder anti-tank gun with the quad tractor. We still get the free artillery observer that the Brits get in bolt action, and so I'm putting them in the brain carrier, which is why I need that. And that comes out to pretty much exactly 1250. I think I adjusted some things and got to exactly 1250, but I might go back to a previous version where it's like 1247. But I just prefer having the different options. that's a little messy in there around that hatch. Not sure if you can get a good look on that, kind of right here where the hinges of the hatch and the lining of the camo kind of overlap. Oh, I've ruined that. Saying that about the brown running out, or drying out rather. This black is getting to that point. With acrylic paints, you can often give them a bit of extra life by just putting some clean water in the pot, mixing it up. But you can only do that so many times. That is a limiting, or a limited technique. And I've added water to to my black here a couple of times. So there is probably no rescuing it any further. I'll kind of keep using it until it fully dies. I think I've already got some replacement black. This is that track that just ends halfway through, isn't it? Yeah. Next. I don't know what it is about that track. I've noticed it a few times, but it's... yeah, the last like 90 seconds is just completely silent. Rusticator asks, how actually useful are tanks in standard games of bolt action? I watched a bunch of bat reps, and they almost always seem to be a bit underwhelming. Depending on how you use them, they very much can be underwhelming. Especially if you go for a very large, high points cost tank. Yeah, you end up not being able to do much elsewhere. A decent medium tank, like Sherman T-34, Panzer 304, Cromwell, something like that, in a 1,000 point or more game is definitely a handy thing to have, because although there are things on the table that can kill it, not everything on the table can kill it. So your enemy might have an anti-tank gun, might have a howitzer with enough pen to hurt it. The enemy tank is always, almost always, not always, almost always a threat. But that's sort of about it. And so sticking your tank somewhere where it's threatening something your opponent wants to do, like the objective or the large open area where they want to advance, then you can sway the course of a battle. It's not necessarily about, oh, the tank didn't kill anything this game, therefore it's useless. But if my tank was in the right position, that it made my opponent do something or not do something that then gave me the conditions to win, it's definitely useful. You definitely don't want to go for a big tank, as I mentioned, unless you're in either a tank wars game or you're in a very high points cost game, like well over 1,000 points. But because the tank itself is only getting one shot per turn with its main gun, and you might get some shots with a machine gun as well, but the main gun's only shooting once. I think the only exception to that would be the Grant, because that gets to shoot its mantlet gun and the turret gun. But other than that, you're shooting one shot per turn. There's always a decent chance that you're going to miss. And so what I tend to do is go for light tanks. Simply because they're less points, and so I've got more points elsewhere in my list to do stuff with. If you compare a T-34 to a T-70 light tank that my Soviets use, you've got one less armor, so you're 1 in 6 more likely to be damaged by incoming fire. Your main gun is 1 less, and so you're 1 in 6 less likely to cause damage. That's a little bit of a disadvantage, but not a massive disadvantage. It is half the points cost. It goes from 190 to 125, so it's a little over half the points cost. So I've then got 80 points to spend on another infantry squad that can hang around the tank and look after it. But it's still going to be shooting at the same targets. It's still going to roll the same hit rolls. It still has the same movement. And so particularly for smaller games like 850, 600 point games like that, I like me a little silly little light tank. Or an armoured car. I actually love armoured cars. I have an armoured car with an anti-tank gun for all factions except for Japanese, because they don't have one. And so if you take, as a side note, kind of, or an alternate option, take a light tank and an armoured car instead of a medium tank, because then you've got a little bit better mobility, a little bit better flexibility, because now you can be in 2 places at once. Oh, ruined that. For sometimes the same-ish points cost, depending on which light tank, which medium tank, and which armoured car you're talking about. It pretty much is balance issue, because we're not playing a game that's a massive battlefield. We don't have a lot of the redeployment of platoons of units across the battlefield. It's just a little snapshot of the sharp end of a battle. That's all bolt action is. And so everything has to be kind of on par with each other. Maybe that's not quite the right term, but that said, it's pretty historical. Tanks off by themselves get taken out pretty quickly. So hanging around with some infantry is always a good thing. I know a few guys at the my local gaming group who often don't run tanks at all. In these kind of small unit actions, there's not really any massive loss to not taking a tank. There's a guy who runs British Airborne. He's got Panzerfaust, Piat on a Jeep, Flamethrower on a Jeep, Engineer Squad on foot with anti-tank grenades, and light anti-tank gun. Spread those over the battlefield. You can probably have a good go at offending whatever enemy armor comes your way. And while there is a little bit of a disadvantage to not having the protective shell of the tank, you've got 2 extra infantry squads out of it. And so your board presence is greater because of it. It is a trade-off. Having one tough, hard to knock out unit, or having 2 kind of faster units that might get taken out more easily but might be able to get into the right position faster. There's no wrong answer. Another reason why I like bolt action, it's well enough balanced that you can play in so many different ways, like without it really being a problem. Like you can run small veteran squads. You can run massive inexperienced squads. You can run with no armor or light tank and light tank, APC and an armored car, or just with a medium tank, and they all work. As long as you always have something that can take out a tank and something that can take out infantry, you're good to go. That panel there, can I get into focus? Right here. That is some horrible brush strokes. I must have missed that with the airbrush. Disappointing. I haven't put the white line on this, but let's at least get the black line ready for it. I'm not sure if I'm getting better at painting these lines or if I'm just getting more and more accepting of bad lines. Maybe it's just messy. It's not necessarily historically inaccurate to have camouflage pattern messily applied. It's a little better. Still going to leave streaks, I think, but paint often appears darker when it's wet than when it's dry, but this tan just appears much brighter yellow. Right, shall I get... Yeah, let's get some grey down so that I can put the white for this line back here. Am I still in frame and in focus? Well, as good as it gets. as possible. Let's go for some whites. Here we go. Wow. There is just a puddle of medium just hanging out on the top of my white paint now. At least it's keeping the top of the white paint hydrated. I'm wondering why this patch here is dark brown. That's a bit messy. I'm wondering how my line has changed in thickness. There are points where my line is pretty thick and where it's pretty thin. Rustigator said, wait, isn't white supposed to be on the in? Oh no, you're right. Ah, I've done this wrong. Oh well. You know what? I did actually say in my video on the Toon Sherman that I wanted to try it this way around. The tank at Bovington, the M3 Grant, has it this way around with the black on the dark brown and the white on the tan. But I said in my Toon Sherman video I wanted to try it the other way around. I'm not sure if that's a big enough area to actually compare. Yeah, well spotted, thank you. Do I fix it or do I just leave it? Because by the time I've got the tracks on, and by the time it's on the tabletop, you're very rarely going to see that part of the tank. And what's to say that the tank crew weren't distracted when they were painting it, just like I was distracted when I was painting it. It's one thing about model painters when they get very, very uppity about the exact layout of a particular camo pattern. And if you're replicating a specific vehicle from a specific period in time, that's fine. You want to recreate what it was like. But when you're painting 6 tanks for a war game and you're copying the exact camo pattern that one tank had, the exact layout of every stripe and every splotch, that's not historically accurate. Because think about how these camo patterns were actually applied. They weren't applied by technicians or like the engineers that repaired the vehicles. They were applied by the tank crews themselves. Famously, there's a video, an archive video of a German tank crew, and they've just been given the winter whitewash So they're applying this winter camo pattern over the top of their summer camo pattern. And they're literally doing it with a mop. There's the German tank crew are just climbing up the side of the tank and stabbing at their tank with the mop covered in this. Covered in the white camo. You know what? I actually do like it that way around. I tell you what, at some point soon, not for a historical vehicle, for a sci-fi vehicle at some point, I'm going to paint a camo pattern that's a dark and a light colour, and I'm going to double line it in the same way as this. Maybe not with black and white, maybe with something else, but I'm going to do it this way around with the dark line on the light colour and the light line on the dark colour, because I actually do prefer that way round. Like an Easter egg on the model. Yeah, let's leave it for now. It's technically wrong. The tank crew got distracted when they were painting it. But thankfully it is only on this tiny little bit here. Well. Whoops. I just noticed this bit is also still grey. So in my case, for those who haven't already heard this 1,000 times, white paint is notoriously hard to paint. The pigments for white acrylic paints are quite poor, especially as we're not using titanium anymore for the very real health concerns. But I have found that the particular grey that I have goes down in one coat over pretty much everything, and then my white goes on top of the grey pretty much in just one coat. So with one coat of white, one coat of grey, one coat of white, I get a pretty decent white. Although on here there are some points along this line where it's not looking great. While we're here staring at it, let's fix that. Probably going to pick up a new brush soon as well. I like these brushes. They hold a point and they're cheap, but they do not last long. I go through one every 2 months, thereabouts. 2 or 3 months. Hello! Badgersby. Ah! Badger! Yay! How you doing? What brand paint are you using? I have a rule that I never say the brand of paint because it doesn't matter. However, in this case, because I know that you're actually a better artist than I am, I have a collection of different colours from different brands, from different eras. I think that's my collection. The square pots are Revell Aquacolor. Make sure you don't get the gloss, because if you get gloss you'll absolutely just have a horrible time with it. Make sure you get the matte, but these paints are very good. This one in particular, which I use so much I've rubbed the ink off of the stamp. It's the leather brown, and this is my second pot of it and it's now empty. This is an excellent brown for mini painting. I of course have Citadel, because who doesn't end up with Citadel paints? I think this is my last of the... Nope, I actually have a couple others of this old pot, but they do this new pot that is absolutely terrible. To be fair, the Revell pots are not very good either, but they're a third of the price, so I'd rather have these. the paint's basically the same quality. I also have Army Painter. Army Painter's okay. They come in dropper bottles, which is nice, but I would say that the paint quality is a little bit less than the others. They can be very, very thin. You often have to add medium to them just to get them to paint smoothly. They're good for glazing, however. Kind of being thin, they're very good for glazing and that kind of thing. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just it doesn't fit my style as much. And Pro Acryl, which I have found to be, for me personally, the exact right consistency. Thick enough that you can dry brush with it, but nice and smooth, and you can thin it down very easily with just water. Nearly to glazing with just water before you start having to put medium in it. There you go. Oh, I knew there was one I forgot. P3. P3's fantastic paints. Very similar to Pro Acryl, maybe a bit thinner. So not good for dry brushing, but good for all of the other techniques that you'd use. And always very heavily pigmented. This is a blue-grey, and that goes really nicely on anything. Right, where was I? Black and white stripes on the turret now. Be me a painting anytime. I doubt that very much. Yeah, so my usual rule is that I don't say what paints are, what the specific color or the specific brand, because particularly in the community, like for the last, this has been going on for at least 10 years, if not longer. There is this idea that, oh, this paint that this particular painter uses will make me as good a painter as them. It's like, no, it's the practice that makes you a good painter, not the not the equipment. Having good quality equipment, having good quality paints, you know, like, don't get craft paints. But yeah, having a reasonable quality, like even if you're getting Army Painter, there's nothing wrong with it. You just have to paint it in a certain style. And for the average painter, just get stuck in, get whatever paint, get if all you can get is Citadel, get Citadel, use that, not a problem. Where does that line actually go? Can't really see it on camera any more than I can see it in... Oh, it goes along here, along the front of the mantlet. That's odd. You can tell that on the underneath it's just grey from the primer, because whenever I paint, I make sure I paint it from the top and the sides, but it's never going to be seen from the underneath. I am unashamedly not a display painter. I am, or a diorama painter. I am a wargamer painter. And so my models are painted for that purpose. Look good on a shelf in between games and look good on the table during a game. They will be viewed from a meter's distance, kind of arm's length at all times. And although this particular vehicle does need some touching up for the paints, because I'm not sure if you can see it, but like around here it's kind of the tan's a bit thin, quite a bit thin, and up here the brown's a bit thin as well. Although I'm pretty sure that's my thumbprint in that paint, so whenever that was wet, I probably... Can we get that? Kind of this grey spot here, there's ridges in it that are most definitely my thumbprint. So whenever I painted this with the airbrush, I picked it up far too quickly. So I'll fix that. That's something I will fix. I haven't done it again, have I? No, black on the brown side. That's right. Actually, interestingly enough, I just realised this now. All of the colours of this camouflage pattern are Revell aqua colour. It's the tar black and the white, just plain white, which will be the lining. And then Lederbrun and sand. I think it's sand. Sandy yellow. Sandy yellow. That's why it looks so yellow, particularly when it's fresh. Yeah, now that that's dried, that's matching colour much better. I'm actually enjoying, oddly, because this is another, I don't want to say problem because that's overstating it, but just a misconception that floats around the mini painting world quite a lot is that, like, even if you're not necessarily painting with the same paint that someone else painted with, well, once you've chosen your paint, you have to paint all of your models with that exact same paint. Like whichever one you choose, you have to stick with that one. And that's also not correct. And I'm quite enjoying, as I'm going through various models and kind of painting month in, month out, when a paint runs out, I'm not going to replace it with that exact one. I'm going to just replace it with something similar. So my tan, my sandy yellow, actually, that I've done a lot of painting with the sandy yellow recently. That camera is rotating around. There you go. When that finally runs out, which is on its way out already, I'm going to be replacing it with an ochre, which is essentially very, very similar in hue. The sandy yellow is obviously a sandy yellow, as the name implies, whereas the ochre is a sandy orange. But it's not that orange. It's only got the tiniest bit of red in it, kind of hint of red in it. And so it's almost like it's the same paint, but just a slightly warmer version of it. And so as I go through and paint some other tank for the for my Brits, or for the infantry, or for some of my Soviets that I use, that the sandy yellow one, the ochre will replace that, and I'll have some new models with a just slightly warmer hue to them. If you can hear the neighbour's dog is fine. They are overly dramatic. It's actually a good point for my Tanith. Tanith first and only. The cloaks that I paint for the Tanith are... Why is that hatch grey? On this one, Basically, I've painted the left side of both of the hatches, not the inside or the outside, just the left side. That needs to be brown. Let's coax some life into the leather brown. Yeah, I'm not getting that to go through the airbrush to paint up the gaps in this. I'm gonna have to work something out. Yeah, for the Tanith first and only, I paint the cloaks. The first part of the cloak is base coat with a dark green, and then a quick highlight with a lighter green. And over the course of the army, the dark green ran out, so I replaced it with a different dark green, and then the light green, Goblin Green of all things, the old from 2001, 2002 kind of era. That ran out, and so I replaced that with a scale color actually, which I quite like. Let's get that thumbprint off of the armor. We don't need that. Right, let's put that aside to dry to make sure I don't stick my thumbs in it some more. Because we have another turret. Because not only does Warlord Games make bolt action, the historical, semi-historical World War II game, but we also have Conflict 47, a kind of science fiction what if World War II had mech suits and Tesla guns and went on to 1947. And that's what this is. This is a Tesla cannon for Sherman. When I first saw this, I thought it was pretty cool. There's just one little niggling little thing in my head when I first saw it, and that's it doesn't have a coax machine gun. It's just got like the big Tesla cannon, but it doesn't have a coax, and so you just have the bow machine gun to deal with infantry. But when you actually read the rules for the Tesla cannon, it has two different firing modes, one where it punches through armor, and the other one where it will arc between infantry units and have, well, maybe not the same effect as a machine gun, but it will fill the same role as a machine gun. So I needn't have worried. Ooh, Rustigator says a whole bunch. Guess people just want to be consistent with their paint schemes. Yes, that is the common argument that I see all of the time. People want to be consistent with their paint schemes. Why? Why do you want to be consistent? Like, reality is inconsistent. How do I do this easily? I have an image. I'm just hunting it down so I can throw it onto the frame. Bang. There we go. So this is a group of Soviet soldiers at the end of World War II in their combat uniforms, and from what I understand, behind them is a captured German aircraft. They captured the airfield, and this the plane was just on the ground at the time. It doesn't seem to be a German aircraft. I think it might actually be a Soviet aircraft, but I'm not an expert on aircraft, so I need to do the research and check up and see exactly what plane that is. But the plane itself is not the point. The point is their uniforms. Look at these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 soldiers of the Soviet army, the People's Red Army, and look at their shirts and look at their trousers. Can you between these 7 soldiers find a shirt and trousers that match in colour? Because you can't. Every single piece of clothing has come from a different batch of when the uniforms were manufactured, and each of those batches have just a separate batch of dye. And especially during wartime, you don't waste time to mix up exactly the same shade of dye as you had for the last batch, because you just want it tan or khaki or green or whatever color you're going for. Mix up something that's from the dyes you've got, mix it up, and then there you go, that's what you use. And then the next time, well, you don't have this particular ingredient for the dye, and so you go without, or you have this other alternate one that gives a different color. That's fine, you just use whatever you've got. There will be people who say, oh, but this is the Soviet army and they're all inconsistent and crude and stuff, but there is an equivalent picture to this of a collector of German army uniforms, and there's a bunch of shirts. You can get rid of this picture now. Let's go back to the painting. A bunch of uniform shirts for the German army. That's the same thing. They are green, they are grey, they are dark blue, they are light blue. There's probably 15 or 20 in the photograph, if I remember rightly, and not 2 of them are the same colour. Now, if you found 2 shirts from the same batch, they would be the same colour, but even then they might not be, because if one's been issued and been used on the front lines for several months, it's going to be worn, whereas if one gets issued to someone further back, it's not going to see as heavy use, and so it's going to be richer in colour, whereas the more used one's going to be more faded and darker. And so, to the statement of got to use the same paints because I want them to be consistent, why? Why do you want all of your models to look exactly the same when, like, even reality isn't that consistent? You would want some level of inconsistency, so that to add to the character, to add to the story of where the little soldiers came from. And it doesn't have to be a historical setting; that can be for science fiction as well. Especially Space Marines, because like in Warhammer 40k Space Marines, I mean not like sensible Space Marines, having like Brother Brutus McTiffy or whatever his name is, he's just wandered off to an orc planet for the last 6 months and he's just got back. His armor's going to be absolutely wrecked, and it's going to be repaired. It's going to get taken up to the absolute pristine standard. But other brother, he's been on ship the whole time, and he hasn't had his armor repaired because it's not been damaged, and so it would be more faded and more damaged. And it probably wouldn't be, it's not damaged, but like the odd chip here or there and the odd ding. Nothing that needs repair. I was actually realised that was the first half of your comment. I didn't read the rest of your comment. So for the rest of your comment, it's also quite handy when you don't have to mix all of your highlight colours at the same time. My same exact little rant applies to that as well. For my Soviets, I painted them in batches of 8 or 10 or 12 sometimes. But even within a batch, I wouldn't make up enough of any given paint for all of the whole batch. I would make up enough for 2 or 3 models, and I'd paint those 2 or 3 models, and then I'd mix up a new like little mix. And so over the course of those 12 models, I'm probably mixing 3 or 4 base coats, 3 or 4 highlights, and then for the next highlight another 3 or 4. So, and I'm not keeping them consistent between, like this was the first model and the second model, so they have the same highlight. Now this is the first model and the 7th model that are getting the same highlight on the second round, and so by the time I'm done, they all have a very inconsistent colouring. I made a joke that you could look through my Soviet army for an hour and you wouldn't find 2 models that matched, and it's probably true, quite deliberately so. But they do look consistent because they've all been painted in the same technique, and they've all been painted by the same person, me. And so having the same paint, same brand of paint, the same colour of paint, it's just not important when it comes to consistency. Yeah, back to the Tanith first and only. All the ones the biggest difference between my early models and my later models is not that I changed the paint, it's that I changed my style. There are some of my very early models, particularly some of the Perry ones, that kind of don't match the rest of them because they have a different camouflage pattern. Where was I? Black Lion. I did it again, right here. There's no tan on the hatch. Legion Smiles, hello. Agreed, it shows that a machine didn't paint your models for you. Yeah, I mean that as well. It is an art form, mini painting. That said, like, I'm not going to be snobby against people who don't like painting. That it's fine to want to play a war game without painting the models. I actually really like the pre-painted D&D models for exactly that reason, because like I can paint better than that. I would rather paint rather than buy a pre-painted model. But for anyone who doesn't want to paint, for anyone who doesn't like this, for anyone I don't want to go out and buy a £40 paint set and and kind of learn how to do this other skill, kind of painting models, and spend hours and hours and hours learning how to paint just so I can paint my hero character. But the same goes for wargamers as well. It's like some people just want to play and not paint, and that's fine. And so having either a pre-painted option or commission painting or whichever is fine. I can't remember my point to that. Missing hatches shows consistency. Thank you. Though in the photo it's not originally in colour. Yep, that is actually true. That is a colorized photograph. I have seen the original black and white of that photograph, and you can tell by the value of the black and white that they are different tones. You can't quite necessarily tell as different as is made out in the colorized version, but in the black and white you can see that there are different values, different brightnesses of uniform between the soldiers. A lot of this stuff is going to end up being copper, so I don't have to necessarily get all of that. I'm actually happy to not finish this turret so much. I don't have anyone around me who's playing Conflict 47 yet. By golly, I'll get them playing it sometime. I just want to keep painting the armored officers because they're cool. I'm hoping to get another armored officer, the Americans, done soon. which ones have I done? I did Soviet Brits, German, so I've got the Americans. Thing is, with the Americans, I don't just have the armoured officer, I have the armoured infantry, and I have a jackal, which I'm going to paint. Jackal? Coyote? The War Walker for Conflict 47. And I'm going to paint that in exactly the same style. I'm probably going to paint them all at the same time, but do I include them in the video? For the sake of kind of consistency for the series, I might want to just paint the 3 officers and kind of subtly mention, oh, and by the way, here are some of the infantry that I also painted in the same style. It would make the video easier to produce. But then for the German armored officer, I included I think it was a Nachtjäger Night Hunter extra model that I got. So maybe it is. I mean, it's not like I'm a hyper professional YouTuber or anything. With my tens of thousands of views, and hey, consistency in painting is not required, so why is consistency in my videos required? Maybe I should just be inconsistent and do the whole lot in one. And that's as good enough. Given that I've just gone on a rant about consistency, that is probably telling me that I really should go off the rails. I don't actually like many of the walkers for Conflict 47. It's kind of a shame. The one that I do like is the Japanese, the Scorpion Light Walker mech. Such a cool vehicle. It looks like the ones from Ghost in the Shell. I wonder if there's actually inspiration there, because that's also Japanese anime. Wait, what's going on down here? Ah, missing black line. That poor dark brown is desperately hanging on. It's trying its absolute best. Yeah, so just this bit. Get a black line on there, and then I can put this turret away. What should we do? Just gone 8, halfway through the stream. We can get some get the tracks done, I think. Get the tracks on the Sherman and the Universal Carrier done at the same time. I did those really close together, didn't I? It's almost like I'm painting a yellow line in between these two white lines just because of how close I put those. That's fine. It works. I'm really sad that I'm not putting a wash on this. Anyone who's been following on my that's pretty cool. Various painting of tanks videos. I have fallen into a particular style. That's not a bad thing. I like the style, but it's modulation in the original color, various weathering, and then a wash over the top. And this tank is not getting either of those things because I've already painted the base coats before I really learned the modulation style, and it's kind of too late to go back and do it now. I could, but it would take a lot of cleanup, and basically it would be painting from scratch again. But also I'm not using a wash on any of my British army because they're in the sunny desert and I want them to be nice and bright. Even the same for the infantry. They're getting the yellow on the uniform there's done, but the rest of it isn't. So they're getting a bright sandy yellow uniform. And that's what they look like with just the base coat underneath. So that's the darkest shadow for the uniform. It's this kind of medium brown. So it never gets really dark, but it does get quite bright. So that's where this style for the infantry comes from. And I wanted to keep that consistent enough, kind of the same style across the vehicles as well, to not have a wash. Metallics. Let's sacrifice a part of my very lovely looking wet palette. This is actually not anywhere near as bad as it usually is. That's where I've been doing the black, but if you see that fold, that's not a splodge of paint, that's actually the paper coming up. So I'm not going to go there. I'm going to start a new puddle of paint over here. Going to need about at least that much, probably a lot more. This is plate mail metal from Army Painter. It's way too bright and it's kind of chintzy and shiny. It would be nice for parade armor or like kind of elves if you're doing that. Silver bayonets sort of thing. But I want a much darker steel, like dull steel, kind of worn and used. And so I'm just going to mix in a little bit of black to it. It's about 1/4 black. And that will give me very nice kind of dark silver. It's the thing with metallic acrylic paints. The colour, gold, brass, bronze, steel, silver, is just a normal pigment colour. Same as for your regular non-metallic paints. Legion Smiles says, using a wash and purely relying on paint is bold. It's how I have painted a lot of my stuff in the past. Washes are nice. Washes give you a lot of definition very quickly. But it's just one style of painting. And there are many other styles. You don't have to conform to one. Base wash highlight is a valid technique, but you don't have to paint everything that way. Do I have I think I've put her away. I've got another Zona the board game model. We're all going back to last year. I'm doing a live stream, painting the Sherman. Haven't done that since last year. And I'm doing a Zona model. I have done a Zona model. I guess we can give you a sneak peek of that. Let's just find the image. If I can remember where it is, it should be Zona Prospector. And oh, it's much higher resolution than the other one. Give me a second to shrink it down. that's one that I just painted. And there's no wash on this one either. The highlight's really messy, really splotchy, because I've done pretty much all of the highlighting with yellow, and yellow's a nasty color to mix and paint with. I can paint just a straight yellow. I've worked out techniques of how to paint a straight yellow, but I have not yet learned how to mix yellow like this. So the idea of this model, what I was aiming for, was that you can see she's kind of holding her hand up to her face. I wanted to make it look like there was like headlights of a truck or something shining on her, and she's put her hand up to stop the light shining in her eyes. And so all of the highlights were done with yellow because, you know, yellow truck headlights. That made sense to me. Unfortunately, when I painted her trousers green and added yellow to it, it ended up with a very, like, not yellow highlight. It ended up more of a, like you see, a lime green. And when I painted her jacket blue, well, blue and yellow make green, so you end up with more green. So instead of being a yellow highlight, it ends up being a green highlight. From a distance, the effect actually does still work. It doesn't look like truck headlights or vehicle headlights, because you don't really get green vehicle headlights. But it does look like there is some green light shining on her from that direction. I need to take a picture of the other side, kind of from that side, her back, because it's better effect there. Anyway, close that down. But instead of using a wash on that model, on the opposite side, kind of the dark side of the model, as it were, I just mixed black with the base coat. So with the blue I mixed black, with the green I mixed black. Her scarf is purple, so the purple and black. And then instead of like how you paint a highlight by painting the upper surfaces or kind of anything pointed in the direction of your light, on the other side I painted everything that was hidden from the light with this mix of black and the base color, and that gives not only a desaturated highlight but a very dark, sorry, not highlight, shadow, desaturated and dark shadow, whereas the yellow on the other side gives a very saturated but bright highlight. So I've gone from desaturated and dark to saturated and light across the model. And yeah, the yellow pigment sucked to work with, because yellow pigment sucks to work with. But other than the yellow being horrible, it actually does work quite well. I think if I'd have gone with white and just had just someone shining a white light at her, it would have been much more consistent. I need a bit more. Rustigate says, hate yellow, just a hint of dark in the undercoat. No, more yellow, just green. The model looks cool. She's illuminated by some kind of an anomaly. Yes, yes. That's why I'm okay with it, because it's a Zona the board game model. Being illuminated by a green light, that's fine. That's fine. I'm not. It's some kind of chem anomaly, probably. Yeah. All right. Now the annoying bit of painting the tracks, getting a base coat inside all of these bits. I know some people who actually paint the whole track assembly like disassembled, and will paint like each section of track and then glue it together. And I get it, but also no. No, it's fine. I'm gonna have to be more careful with this one than with any of the other vehicles though, because as mentioned, I usually fall back on the wash. Bye bye Badges B. Send me a message at some point, because you haven't spoken to me in forever. Good to see you're okay, and hopefully see you soon. And have a good day. Yeah, so usually putting a wash over vehicles is I do like that kind of style. You can much more easily get a wash into here, and even the wash and the primer just darkens it down to the point where you don't really notice that it doesn't have the right specific tones of color. Like the metallic, it doesn't have metallic flakes or anything like that. That's not a problem. But in this case, I'm not going to be using a wash, so I do have to get metallic over everything inside there. I don't know how much of that's actually going to be visible. Oh, it's all going to be visible. Okay. Yeah, all the way down to there. Yeah. I'm annoyed that I didn't paint these with the airbrush. I didn't get the dark brown on them. And now that my Lederbrun is definitely not suitable for the airbrush anymore. Do I be inconsistent and paint a different paint brown on the same vehicle? Probably. Stay safe, will do. Good. That is probably the answer I'll go with. I could brush on the last of the leather brown. I might actually try that. I can use my favorite brush. This poor thing is getting more and more damaged. It is just every time I use it, it's even more shredded. The poor thing. We shall see how far it gets. It's already shedding. You know, I've already picked. What video was it? I think it might have been the Sherman Firefly, the Toon Sherman, where there's a bit of B-roll of me actually picking a bristle from the brush out of the paint that's on the model. I'm not sure if that was the Sherman Firefly. It might have been a different video. Hopefully this particular step of painting isn't too incredibly dull and boring for you. It's just getting the silver on all of the tracks. Don't want to miss a bit like I did on... Might have been it was either the Stuart or the M10. think it was the M10, I missed a section of track when I was painting the silver. I ended up putting the wash over it, and when I got to, and I just didn't notice. And when I got to the turntable shot at the end of the video, it was turning around, and there's a massive section of that track that is a distinctly different and much less visually interesting looking color. Why is that? So I had a look, and it's like, yeah, I didn't base coat. There's no silver paint there. It's just wash over the primer. So I pulled that out, and I quickly did the silver in the wash again, and then back on the turntable for it. Yeah, that must have been the M10 tank destroyer. M10 Wolverine. So that Zona model does remind me of a model I did quite a long time ago now, which I think might have been in my paint a model every day for 7 days video. Might be one of those. It's a cyberpunk character standing at a kind of little phone booth. I think it was originally a parking meter, which also works. But I prime the model black, and the back half of the model that is away from the parking meter, the video call, whatever it would be. Kind of the back side of the model is completely black. It's just left as the primer, and then around the sides it got base coated, and it goes very quickly into a very desaturated white highlight close to the screen. And it's like, it is nighttime and you are paying your parking fine, or you're on the video phone to someone, whatever that might be. And that was a much better lighting effect than the Zona one. I think just because it was stronger, because it did go from pure black to, I don't think it was ever pure white on that one. Are those models near Games Workshop scale, like two-man tank, like the two-man tank in the background? This is a Universal Carrier, sometimes referred to as a Bren Carrier, but I shall not get into the history of that. Games Workshop infantry are hero scale. They're 28mm hero scale, which means that they are that a standard human, baseline human, if you will, is 28mm to the eyes, 32mm to the top of the head. So if you ever hear them called 32mm scale, that's incorrect, because that's measuring to the top of the head. The reason why you measure to the eyes is because if a character is wearing a helmet, a big feathery hat, all sorts of other things, it is often very difficult to actually measure to the exact top of the head to get a correct reading. Whereas if you measure to the eyes, usually the eyes are visible, and if the eyes aren't visible, then the visor on the mask, or on the helmet or the mask is more easily measurable. Warlord Games infantry is also 28mm hero scale. Over the many years that both Warlord Games and Games Workshop have been running, the amount of hero scale changes, but the height of the model doesn't. So I don't have any Cadians up here to show you, but some of the older Warlord Games models are much thinner than this guy. Whereas if you look at like the old style Cadians, they are super chunky and like look like they're in puffer jacket suits, and they'll be way thicker than this. But the modern Cadians are probably very similar to these in terms of their bulk, and they're still 28 hero scale. The vehicles, on the other hand, what that means is that Warlord Infantry and like Imperial Guard are close enough, equivalent-ish. Depends on the era, you can make it work. Vehicles, on the other hand, Games Workshop's vehicles, particularly in 40k, are vehicle hero scale plus. They are absurdly, ridiculously big in all sorts of different ways. Whereas Warlord Games vehicles are actually true scale. They're not hero scale at all, they're true scale. So this is, as a Universal Carrier, this is a 1:56 scale version of Universal Carrier. And this is a 1:56 scale version of a Sherman. Which is why you often find that the figures that come with vehicles and the figures that come as infantry, they don't quite look the same. If this guy had his feet, he would stand and be the same height, but he's so much thinner because he's true scale. The one in the vehicle is true scale because he came with the vehicle, and the vehicle is true scale. But the infantry here is hero scale, and so while they might end up being the same height, this one's going to be a lot chunkier. And so if you tried to put Imperial Guard models in this, like you could put one Imperial Guard on each side, whereas you can easily fit 4 of these Warlord Games models in there. You'd probably only fit one guy in the front if you were kit bashing like a modern Cadian into there. You could make it work, but it's gonna look a little odd unless you used unless you use these bodies and just put like the helmet or just the head on, because that's what these are actually heads from the other kit, from the other Warlord Games kit, so it does work. Oh, actually, I do have, I'm going to get up from the camera for a second, because I do have something that really shows the vehicle hero scale of 40k. This is a Sherman. This is a normal medium tank, and every kind of run-of-the-mill. There are bigger tanks, there are smaller tanks. This is the mid-range, the one that you want everywhere, do everything well kind of tank. This is a Lehman Russ. There are bigger tanks, there are smaller tanks. This is the mid-range, the one that you want everywhere. Compare those for size. Can't quite fit them in frame together. Comparing height, the Sherman's turret doesn't come up to the top of the Lehman Russ's hull. In terms of length, the Lehman Russ is longer, and in terms of breadth, even without the sponsons, tracks aren't glued on this. Even without the sponsons, it's nearly twice the width. Not quite twice, but nearly twice the width. So this model is supposed to represent a very similar type of vehicle as this in terms of how big it would end up being. But because of the vehicle hero scale nature of 40k and the true scale nature of bolt action, I had tracks on the wrong way around, that's why they do one thing. That's why they look so different. So this is a superhero scale 40k tank. This is a true scale bot action tank. Conversely, or additionally, if you will, another model that I'm working on. This is a mouse. This is the German Panzer VIII mouse. This is the largest tank that was ever produced in the real world. 1.5 of them were built and they never actually saw combat. They were on the training ground, on the proving ground, when the Soviet Union advanced. And you can see that compared to the Sherman, it's bigger. It's a little bit taller. It's quite a bit longer. It's even a little bit wider. There is no match between these two. The 75mm gun that the Sherman has would probably not really stand a hope of getting through the armor on this thing, and even the secondary gun, this little thing, would probably take out a Sherman quite easily. This is not a fair fight, but this is the biggest, heaviest tank that has ever existed in the real world. There's the Luminous. Shorter front to back, taller top to bottom, but this is much wider. The overall volume, the Lehman Russ is actually bigger than a mouse. And so, again, the everyday, run-of-the-mill, medium, extra medium tank model for 40k is physically larger than what should be the same scale biggest tank ever created in real life. And that's because, like, even though the infantry are the same size, they're both 28mm hero scale, the vehicles are done in a different way. So this is a sort of 28mm hero scale vehicle, but plus, whereas this is a true scale 28mm or 1:56. And that was a big old distraction. Hopefully that answers your question, and also several more questions besides, because I do tend to ramble. Let's lose everything that's not glued down, because I don't want to mess around while I'm painting. Yeah, for this one, if you were going to kit bash this to be like a scout vehicle or a messenger vehicle for 40k, you tried to put even the old Cadian models in here. The torso is about the same size as this guy's shoulders, and then you add on those arms with the pauldrons. You're not going to fit 2 of them in here, not without some serious custom work. So what I would probably do is keep these. I would paint these uniforms to match whatever your Imperial Guard army would be, and then just put on a different head. Makes you want to visit the Tank Museum. I've got some pictures of the Tank Museum. I have the last 2 times I've been to tank museums or museums with World War II stuff. I just take pictures of rust. There you go, Matilda 1. I've got 6 or 7 pictures of close-ups of the rust on the tracks of this one. Interestingly, this has had its track guards removed. There's one section at the very back, just over the top of the track, but usually it would have track guards over the whole thing. But yeah, I have pictures like this, where I'm just taking pictures of the rust and the corrosion and what does the drive sprocket and the idler wheel look like up close. And there you go. There's a Thornycroft radiator out the front of one of the armored vehicles, and this is how they added armor to a civilian vehicle, and it doesn't fit. It doesn't need to. there's a Goliath. That's originally designed as an anti-tank, like remote controlled anti-tank mine. In practical use was far more widely used as for assaulting bunkers. Like you drive this up to the door of a bunker and detonate it there, or you'd just have it as a remote mine. You drive it onto a road and wait until someone drove down the road, that kind of thing. There is a 40k, I think it's Forge World makes something similar to this. It looks like a mini Chimera, or a mini Chimera hull. There you go, proofing point. Photograph of a bolt. I should actually have somewhere. Oh, here we go. This is an interesting. There we go. So this is something at the Imperial War Museum in London. And on first glance, oh, it's a Lee Enfield, and you just walk past it and ignore it. Then you realise, well, it doesn't have its bolt. And you think, yeah, it's in a museum. Maybe they've just pulled the bolt for safety. And then you have a closer look and you realise that the magazine and trigger block are a single cast lump of probably aluminium or pot metal, probably. The sights and the top sticking out of the upper handguard are also a single lump with none of the markings or anything on. There's no butt pad. There's no sling swivel. There's no rear sling swivel. There are front sling swivels. And you start going through it. It's like, what is this? And eventually, I realised that it's a training rifle. The stock is probably from a firearm Lee Enfield. Well, or rather, it was probably taken from a production line before it ever saw firearm components. But the muzzle cap is a real component rather than the rest of it, and that has to be a properly made part, because that's how you mount a bayonet. You can't mount a bayonet if you've just made this kind of dodgy pot metal casting that doesn't necessarily fit. And so we eventually worked out that this is it's a training rifle. It's to teach brand new recruits. This is how you hold a rifle. This is how you attach your bayonet. This is how you march with it. This is how you move with it. And then at some point you progress on to ideally a 22 trainer for the first few shots, and then for the full power rifle for actual training. Scratch built the 40k remote mine tank. Yeah. I mean, it's a box with little tracks. It's a cool little interesting thing, and like it's a real cool little interesting thing, because the Goliath was very much. What did Forge World call it? Did they call it the Goliath, or did they call it something else? I don't actually remember. I have unfortunately left my water downstairs, and my wet palette is starting to dry out. So tracks. Yeah, there's too much black, not enough silver in that mix. For anyone who's seen, I do actually have a video on the Rubicon Kettenkrad with Goliath mine. And I built a fancy base for the Goliath, well, for the whole set, so that you could. The Goliath mine was glued down to the big base, but the on its trailer. But then the Kettenkrad was not glued down. So at the start of a game, if it's being towed, you can kind of slot the Kettenkrad onto the base and have it towing the mine, just to indicate that it's there. And then when the unit dismounts, that you can unslot the Kettenkrad and there's 3 recesses for the infantry, for the 3 crew for the Kenkrad, so they'll jump on and they can move around and use the Goliath mine. And then when you use the Goliath mine, you just remove the base and have the infantry separate. Hello, Polus the Mad. Sitting here angry at your printer failed to print the tank's body for a second time. Yes, that is what printers do. Printers fail quite regularly, I found. This is a Universal Carrier. This is not strictly speaking a tank. It is a scout vehicle, light transport vehicle. The term universal. Let's talk about the history of this thing, because I did say I wasn't going to talk about it earlier. I lied. I'm going to talk about it. Previous to this, you have the Carden-Lloyd Carrier, which is sort of this suspension with 2 seats at the front and just like a much smaller compartment at the back. And the Carden-Lloyd Carrier was increased in size to basically this, and there was a Bren carrier version where it has a Bren gun on it, hence the name, a mortar carrier, an infantry carrier, an ammunition carrier, and there's all these different variants of what are essentially the same thing. And it was a big logistical nightmare because they all had slight variations in the suspension, in the running wheels, in all the rest of it. And so the British Army demanded, no, we want a single unified base version that we shall call the Universal Carrier, which this is, that you can then dump anything you want onto it as and when you need to, rather than having like 10 different variants. We'll just have one base vehicle that you can then put the 10 different things on. It's a tank if you're brave enough. Well, so the standard armament for the Universal Carrier is still a Bren, which is not fitted at the moment. It goes in the front. It's here. Bren machine gun will go into that slot eventually. Very commonly, you have a pintle mount with a second Bren on the back, and that would be used by whoever's like being transported at the time. And this is why a lot of people get confused with the Universal Carrier, because the Bren has one Bren at the front and one at the top, and then the Universal Carrier has one Bren at the front, one at the top. The armament is the same, but you are no longer calling it by the armament. And all of the suspension and drive train are like they've been standardized, but they're essentially the same. They're not parts interchangeable, I think. But what you can do with the Universal Carrier, I don't know how often this was done. Something I actually want to find out is you can replace the bow Bren gun for the boy's anti-tank rifle. Now, the anti-tank rifle is not an anti-tank gun by a big stretch. This is a 55 caliber, just armor-piercing rifle. Think like a bolt-action M82 from World War II. That's sort of what we're thinking. It'll happily blow through the engine block of like a truck or a Jeep or something like that, or Swimmwagen or Kugelwagen, something like that, Opel Blitz. And it can technically punch through a little bit of armor. So if you've got a Panzer 1 or a Panzer 2, or some of the Italian Caro Protecto, I think they're something like that. The Italian armored personnel carriers, you can maybe punch through the armor of that. So yeah, it's nearly a tank. It's nearly a tank. You can, in a pinch, hunt small game. Yes, that's kind of what I'm getting at. You can hunt enemy armored vehicles with this armored vehicle. Technically, like this would be armored steel on the real one, so it is an armored vehicle. It's massively open topped, so it's not a well protected vehicle, but it is armored, and it can have some anti-armor capability if you have that boys anti-tank rifle. I would love to know how often that was actually done. Like, how often was it equipped with the anti-tank rifle and expected to actually engage enemy vehicles, and what specifically were they going after? Soft skins like trucks and Kugelwagons and jeeps and things, or were they going after APCs and the light tanks? Because the Soviets found in 1940, 1941, their anti-tank rifle, the PTRD, PTRS, PTRD 41, PTRS 41. They could knock the tracks off of a Panzer IV. You can poke a hole in the vision slit, in the periscope of a Panzer III, Panzer IV, but you're not punching through the armour of anything better than a Panzer II, realistically. And so, but the PTRD actually served until the end of the war because they were using it to hunt soft skins and things like the Hanemags, the armoured APCs that the Germans were using. So I imagine the Bren could potentially do the same job. Even up till the end of the war, you can hunt, like blow the engine out of a truck if you're in the right place to do so. Right, we have done the metallic on the tracks. I need to do the road wheels. I'm going to get the road wheels on this done because I think that's actually, that kind of finishes this. It needs some cleanup, needs some weathering, but stages of doneness, which is a thing that I keep talking about. I have black out, and there's my grey. Is that Yahtzee I hear? For reference, for anyone who wanted to know, this is Ethan Maxell, or Ethan Mikesell, and the track is By the Sword. Very much Zero Punctuation's theme song. Okay, there was actually enough grey left on my wet palette. Now comes the most difficult part of painting pre-assembled tracks. There's the tyres on the road wheels. And this is why painting late war or kind of 1943-44 Soviet tanks is easier, because on some of the KV hull and the T-34 hull, they actually ran them without tyres, because the tyre means the track lasts longer, but the tanks weren't actually surviving long enough for that to be an issue. So they saved time on building the tanks by just not putting the road wheels on. Just get them into service as fast as you can. I was about to say that was actually much quicker than I thought, but I've also done a much messier job. Yes, it looks impressive. As almost never deal with historical models, never painted any, but recently had fun cannibalizing a SHAR B1 for some other sci-fi stuff. So here's something interesting about the SHAR B1 the SHAR B1 Biz, the SHAR 2 and the SHAR 2C, and the other SHARs. It took me a while to work this out, and I'm kind of embarrassed that this took me as long as it did to work out. But every single tank, like MBT, in the French military up until kind of 1930 to 1945, had the word SHAR in the name. And I didn't think anything of it. I didn't make a connection between all these different vehicles called SHAR. And it's only when I was doing some Google Translate at one point for another video, and SHAR just happened to be in the sentence I was translating. Guess what it translates to? SHAR is literally the French word for tank. So a SHAR B1 is tank B1. And yeah, like I said, it's embarrassing that it took me as long as it did. A lot of T-34s were missing a lot of their rubber, and after the war, a lot of windows were missing. A lot of windows were missing rubber windows. Windows? Rubber windows? I don't get the rubber windows reference. There's no windows on a tank. Surrender. Never. Never give up. Never surrender. So SHAR is a panzer situation. Yeah, basically. The Germans using the term panzer to refer to tanks. Strictly speaking, it translates to armor. Oh, hello. That track is it's one of the podcasts. Ninjon and Miniac. Trapped Under Plastic, that's the one. That's the intro music for Trapped Under Plastic, which is, for reference for anyone who cares, it's also an Ethan Meixel. It is Demilitarized Zone. SHAR render, okay, fine. Okay, fine. French surrendering jokes are back. During World War One, the Germans actually referred to tanks as tanks. The first German word for tank was just the English word tank, and it's only when they started their own, like against the Treaty of Versailles, their own armored vehicle production with the Mitrailleur tractor, the Gross tractor, and all of that eventually became the Panzer One. They were using terminology to try and pretend that they weren't making tanks because they were not under the treaty. They were not allowed to. Not that any of the European nations were like actually keeping track of this and stopping them. But yeah, that's when Panzer, the German word Panzer, started being used for tanks as opposed to the English word tank. I haven't looked into exactly the kind of the equivalents for char being the French word, because a lot of the World War One French tanks, things like the Renault FT, there's no char in that. But it might still have been called the Renault FT char, or char Renault FT. Alright, let's pop these guys back in. And I think, other than weathering, as I keep saying, I think that's done. Yeah, so we've done the tracks, we've done the road wheels, we've got the armour. Yeah, I mean, it's fine, it's not great. So yeah, a little bit of weathering on top. Yeah, I can glue this stuff in. I'm not going to glue in these two at the back because during a game I can put them in or take them out if there's a unit being transported. Like this indicates that there is a unit on board, and this indicates that they'd be on the tabletop at this point and not in the vehicle. But the front end can certainly be glued together. So let's pull off the Bren. In such a way that doesn't break the Bren. So I've obviously glued these two guns to a bit of sprue just so I could paint them, but I've glued them a little bit too well perhaps, and so where's me knife? FT was export model, or at least an American name. Possibly, I don't have any information that would prove or disprove that. That's possible though. I would have thought that was a loud noise. I'm not sure if was that from my headphones or was that in did anyone else hear a foghorn kind of sound? Right. So how does this go together? Yeah, this is why I couldn't just do a simple magnetize and slide it in and out, because it doesn't actually go in from the front. So we're going to have to glue it on there, I assume. Okay, so the barrel and bipods, no weird sounds, no. Okay, so that means the microphone didn't pick it up, which means it's either in my head, which is possible, or it was just a local sound to me. I am near several roads. It could have been a vehicle, or it could be a number of things. Right, let's put the brand aside for the moment. I want to make sure that I've got gluing surfaces for the glue. So we're going to run across the front. This side, it's just in front of that, so that's nice and easy. And I guess it doesn't have to be all the way through. And then here on this side, it's angled. And I assume it's angled like that to give space. Oh yeah, of course. Because this is the mounting point for the gun. Obviously it has to be further forward so that there's actually space for the driver to sit behind the gun. And so I would have done that differently, but sure, it's fine. And so I can scrape off paint about like that. I'm not sure if that's the right angle. No, that's close enough. Right, let's make sure the uprights are also clear. So I want to Oh, that's actually an angle as well. Didn't realise that. Here we go. So that's clear, and then that surface. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting idea to. We were talking about this about half an hour ago. The scaling of 40k versus true scale bolt action vehicles. I'd actually would be interested in converting a Universal Carrier to be an Imperial Guard, like just light support vehicle. Maybe for the Roan Deepers. For anyone who's read the Gaunt's Ghost series, the Roan Deepers are vaguely World War One, sort of World War Two, maybe British, maybe Australian, maybe a lot of things. Dan Abnett does tend to mix stuff up in regards to that. Okay, so I can get a bit of glue in there and attach the Bren to the stock. The stock is actually under his arm as the part of his body, and then the gun doesn't have the stock on it. Just for comparison, there's a Bren with the stock. Focus, there we go. So what I'll do is I'll put this in, glue the armor panel on the front, and then I should be able to fairly easily, without making too much mess, just tap in a bit of, because this has got some wiggle, so I can tap in there and get that on. Think of using the Universal Carrier STL for FDM print to print and use as a Renegade Scout. Oh, of course. Chaos Imperial Guard or Traitor Guard. They use all sorts of stuff. So yeah, you can absolutely use something based on a Universal Carrier for them. Use it as systems, whatever the equivalent Universal Carrier with a big gun. You could very easily just run this as a light armored vehicle with a heavy stubber, because heavy stubbers are essentially 40k's light machine guns. Granted, I do have a really silly truck inspired by the design that is being used by Digodobs to follow a tank around. Based on a Universal Carrier. I would want to print this probably double the size to make it an Orc vehicle. You'd barely fit an Orc. You know the old 90s Orc truck? The driver for that would probably just fit in here with some conversion work. Heavy stubber is an M2 Browning. I disagree with that. You have baseline humans carrying heavy stubbers and firing from the shoulder. Not even firing them from the hip, firing them actually from the shoulder with a stocked weapon. You're not going to do that with an M2. You can do that with like a GPMG, MG42, brain gun. A light machine gun is pretty much the biggest you can actually shoulder and fire. I mean, obviously 40k is silly and over the top, so you could probably actually say that light machine guns and heavy machine guns combined together are the wide range of what a heavy stubber is. Alright, let's go for it. I've been staring at this long enough. But yeah, Universal Carrier. That was the one that's run out. Bin that. Get the new one. God, I say new one, it's caked and clogged up. Yuck. So here's a question, and I think I already know the answer to this, but I kind of want to kick off a discussion. Is a heavy bolt gun equivalent to an M2 Browning with HE rounds, 100% HE rounds? Or is a heavy bolt gun equivalent to like a GMG, grenade machine gun, like 40mm? Because I think the heavy bolt gun kind of sits in between them, especially the Imperial Guard one. But I think even the Space Marines heavy bolt gun isn't quite as big as a 40mm. Because it's 75 caliber. Space Marines heavy bolt gun is supposed to be 75 caliber, but just because, but they're using better explosives maybe, so it's probably more powerful. But I still don't think it's as powerful as a GMG, Mark 19, that kind of thing. Right, so that goes in, and I did just put a spot on the stock for the Bren. So we can press that in. And make sure that lines up, and that's that. So I just need to find a sensible place. Heavy bolt gun I feel is closer to a grenade machine gun, at least based on shell casing size. Maybe 25mm grenade or something silly. That's fair. It's like, just because it's like a grenade machine gun, it might not be direct comparison to something we would have. So like I said, I want to put the boys anti-tank rifle just propped up on the inside here, so that I can argue, hey, it is on the model. I mean, not that anyone cares. Bolt action players are almost universally totally okay with you like mixing stuff up. Oh, that's a Panzer III Ausführung A. Well, you're not allowed to use it as a Panzer III Ausführung C. No, that would not be okay. Nah, it's fine. Bot action players are totally okay with that kind of thing. And so it's like the pintle mount on here. I'm never going to use that pintle mount. The machine gun, I'm not even going to take it in terms of paying the points for it. I'm kind of tempted to just pull it off the model, but I also can't necessarily be bothered because I've got nothing else to do with it, and it kind of looks cool, so I'm going to probably just leave it there. Heavy bolter is also electrically triggered. Again, it depends on the variant. Some of the variants are electrically. There's a difference between a solenoid firer for something like the Stormbolter on the Rhino versus an electronic primer system, and there have been so many different variants of heavy bolt gun and all sorts of stuff in 40k that yes, there have been variants that do that. But that doesn't really, like, the way that the primer set off doesn't really affect its its use. That just makes it more efficient to manufacture, realistically. There is an argument that I hear every now and again from target shooters, and this is like 1,000-meter target shooters who are like, when they pull the trigger, there is for them an appreciable difference in time. It's called lock time between the break of the trigger and the hammer or striker falling and the firing pin actually hitting a chemical primer and setting off the cartridge, and also then the burning of the powder building up pressure. Whereas if you have an electronic switch instead of a trigger, and that just runs a current through the primer and sets it off that way, it is faster. It is on the order of milliseconds, and only the long range, and not even just long range shooters, but like the top tier world championship shooters care, and even those, probably it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make enough of a difference. Electronic trigger. So for something like there were actually some electronic trigger or solenoid triggers in World War II. The Soviet IS-2, I think, the later variants of the IS-2, at the front of the hull, like a lot of World War II tanks, you would have driver on one side and the radio operator with a machine gun or bow gunner, depending on terminology. But there'd be two people at the front. One would be a driver. The other guy would have a machine gun, probably have a radio as well. The IS-2 has one guy at the front. Or sometimes woman. One person at the front. They would be the driver. And they would have a machine gun with a electronic... It would be a normal machine gun, but just with a solenoid on the trigger. And they'd press a button and that would pull the trigger on the gun. So that's not an electronic primer, that's a solenoid trigger for a chemical primer. 40k is a bit of a mess, so basically anything you say will probably be possible. That is actually, that's entirely true. That's the best way of looking at 40k, is that you can, you're supposed to be inconsistent. And this goes back to my little rant about consistency. This camera has rotated again. This goes back to my little rant about inconsistency in terms of historical stuff. 40k is 40 years old. More than 40 years old. Some of the stuff on Imperial Guard goes back to nearly 50 years ago. And so the way that a las gun works, the way that a las gun looks, the way that it's built, how powerful it actually is on the battlefield, has changed so many times that you can write it to fit whatever you're doing. You don't have to be beholden to, oh, but the law says this. Yeah, but the law says 10 other things as well. Bolt guns have always had a weird flaw of when you apply the realism of gyrojet rounds fired from a grenade launcher round, you end up with a round that could return to you in a strong... The gyrojet's interesting because the gyrojet has a single stage propellant. It just has its onboard rocket motor. So when you fire it, sets off the rocket motor, and it starts from zero, and it slowly, well, in terms of firearms, it slowly accelerates over like 30 or 40 meters. So a normal, like a handgun, you've got this much barrel, and you go from zero to the maximum speed of the projectile in this distance. And then once it leaves the barrel, it's being slowed down by air resistance until it hits something. The gyrojet starts from there, gets to not very fast, and now it's left the barrel, but it's still accelerating because the rocket motor's still going. 40k actually does, the one thing sensible it does with bolt guns is actually have a two-stage system. So you have a conventional barrel, which is sometimes rifled and sometimes not. There you go with the consistency again. A conventional cased ammunition or caseless ammunition, again, consistency depends on which part of the law you're looking at. And that gets the bolt moving. That gets it actually fired and away from the shooter, with some degree of accuracy, because it's now going faster than the speed of sound. And if you want to know about the speed of sound, talk to long-range target shooters, because that's a whole thing. Basically, the way that air behaves below and above the speed of sound is slightly different. And so as your bullet speeds up or slows down, usually slowing down, past the speed of sound, if it was accurate, if the rifling is keeping it accurate above the speed of sound, once it hits the speed of sound, it's going to behave differently and it's going to drop out of the sky, pretty much. And so the same thing must be true of a gyrojet that accelerates from, because it's leaving the muzzle below the speed of sound, and it's only accelerating to the speed of sound 20, 30, however many meters in front of the shooter. And so you've got so much inaccuracy there. The bolt gun does it better. The bolt gun starts off higher than the speed of sound and then accelerates more because of the rocket booster. I often wonder why. What's it for? Because why don't you just have the single stage firearm, like standard gunpowder explosive that launches that first stage? What's the second stage for? What's it doing? Is it for very high velocity? Is the impact velocity of the bolt important? Because bolts are explosive, and so the velocity shouldn't matter. It's just based on, like, once it hits, how big the explosive is. It doesn't matter how fast it's traveling. It could be to do with range. You're getting a lot more range out of a bolt round with a rocket propellant second stage than you would without. But then, of course, it's a silly science fiction story built by people who don't know anything like as much about guns as I do. Right, well, we have dragged on 20 minutes beyond when I was going to end the stream. So let's have a quick recap. We have done nothing with the infantry. We haven't even looked at them yet. That's fine. I can do those some other time. The Brit carrier, sorry, Universal Carrier is pretty much done. It's certainly tabletop ready. It could use a bit of cleanup. This grey bit needs to be painted tan. It needs a bit of weathering. But yeah, it's fine as it is. The Sherman, on the other hand, let's keep this turret for the moment. The historical turret. We haven't done a lot of the suspension and road wheels. We didn't do the tyres either. So that's still to come. And we haven't done a lot of the accessories, the machine guns and radio antennas and lights and stuff. And the towing cable, that all needs to be picked out. So there might be another stream in a couple of weeks because this needs to be done. I mean, it doesn't need to be done. The tournament I play at, you're allowed to have unpainted models. It's not an issue. But I like to have them painted because I like painting. I'm not going to turn away anyone who hasn't got painted models. In fact, one of my favourite opponents, they glue the models together and that's it. They're not even primed, but they're great fun to play against, so no issue. But I like to paint mine because I like to paint. Had a headcanon that the bolt gun is a terror round meant to be somewhat inaccurate and loud and fragmented. It's meant to hit hordes of unarmoured people to scare them. It's a terror weapon. So what you're saying is that Space Marines are orcs. Big loud boomy gun. Bomb, 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 bomb. That would actually be a good point because a two-stage, you wouldn't necessarily be able to appreciate the difference in the sound, particularly at distance, but it would be a different sound. I maybe didn't explain that correctly. You wouldn't be able to tell, right, this is the first stage and this is the second rocket stage. But you'd be able to tell, okay, this is a different sound from a normal firearm or las gun or whatever sound. And so, yeah, and it would be you'd still get the concussion of that first stage and you'd get this more of a roaring, very short, because the bolts are only very small. The rocket motor wouldn't burn for very long, but it would extend the sound. And so, yeah, it would be a different sound, and that might be that might have a psychological impact. The inaccuracy at range, because the Space Marines are supposed to be a strike, like close range. They're the Emperor's sledgehammer kind of thing. Get up close and absolutely thrash everything you come across, kind of thing. That makes sense that they would have a weapon that was very powerful and accurate enough at close range, but then the bolts, the ammunition just keeps on going, and it might hit someone, it might blow up somewhere, and it makes it seem like it's not just a unit of 10, but there's actually like artillery and other shots coming in from all over the place. It makes it multiplies like you say, it multiplies the sound and the amount of impact that they're having psychologically. So yeah, there's some validity to that. Right, let's run the end of the stream. I'll give you a couple of minutes to ask any questions you want to ask before I do end the stream. I will jump ahead of some of the questions to say I'm probably not going to be streaming regularly because of my working pattern. I would like to, so I might stream every now and again on a Wednesday night. I'm also trying to get little videos, any of the video ideas that I don't really warrant like 10, 12, 15 minute videos. If I can edit them into a 4 or 6 minute video, I'm going to try and get those out and release those on a Wednesday as well. So every now and again, it's not going to be common, but every now and again I'm going to have 2 videos a week. Main one on a Saturday and a little one on a Wednesday. Second stage scares orcs. I wonder if the orcs, like, this is something I've never actually seen in any of the lore. Because the orcs love guns, they love explosions, they love DACA, they love the noise and they love all of that. Specifically, do they like bolt guns, or would they rather have something else? Like, would they rather have a shooter? Like, if a bunch of Space Marines landed and lost, and then the orcs killed all the Space Marines, would the orc go after the bolt guns and be like, yeah, let's use these bolt guns because they sound so much cooler? Or would they be like, oh, but they've got the piddly little rocket that's whatever? That would be. I actually don't know. I've not seen either way anywhere in the lore where that's mentioned. Fun little stream and not many questions at this time. That's absolutely fine. You don't have to ask questions. It's not a requirement. As long as you pop past and have fun, that's okay. Rustigator asks, any Tanith projects coming soon? Yes, there are a few. I have I'm basically done with the Tanith project, but there's a few more models left to paint. There's a few more that have things to talk about, including an extremely expensive, the most expensive model I've ever bought. And for anyone who's been around for the Tanith long enough, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That can only be one thing. But then also there's a couple of other milliput jobs, like I made the Tanith Scout Cap, and that's not worth a 15-minute video. That's worth a 4-minute video that I'll release when I'm that's kind of what I was talking about with the shorter videos, finishing off the Tanith stuff. There's just some little bits here or there that I can wrap up in a video. There's the one big project, the most expensive model I've ever owned. If I was a proper YouTuber, I would put that as the thumbnail. It's not nearly as expensive as like some of the YouTubers doing big models at the moment. But yeah, certainly my most expensive. It's more expensive than my Stomper. Saying that, I actually didn't pay for the Stomper because Ratman gave it to me, but had I bought it new, it would have been. It's still more expensive than that. Orcs used to use bolt guns in old editions. They look like shooters since Big Enough. Did they use bolt guns in the same way that Space Marine bolt guns are 2-stage, or did they just call the guns that they used bolt guns because that's what you call guns? Because this is early 40k, and so either one of those could be the case. It could be that they were using a single stage projectile with an explosive bullet, and they were calling them bolt guns. Or they could be using something that's much more like a Space Marine bolt gun, but that they've made themselves. Could be either. Don't know. Right then. Well, it's past now, so I will finish the stream. Thank you very much to everyone who popped past. I'm not going to bother looking at the... Yeah, I'm not going to bother looking at the concurrent viewers because it says nobody's watching the stream, and given that 3 people are currently sending me messages in the chat, that's clearly not true. Allegedly 36 people have come past the stream, which is probably the most I've ever had before, so that's cool. But for anyone who is here and who has watched a little bit and who has enjoyed me painting my 2 little vehicles that are going to see a tournament at the end of the month. Oh, actually, that's the point. I need to edit the last tournament. I need to redo my intro for that. I'll get to that at some point. So thank you very much for popping past. Thank you very much for the comments and all of the just general nice hanging outness. Hopefully I get to do this at some point fairly soon. Particularly because I want to finish this. I reckon one more stream will get this most of the way done. Because it's the road wheels, it's the details on top, and then a bit of weathering. I reckon I can do that in 2 hours. This can be done. But this is already done. Well, a little bit of weathering maybe at some point, but this is done. Right, well, I shall end the stream. So thank you very much, and I will see you at some point soon. I'm ED-SKaR, and I always will be. Yes, end stream.